welcome to Catholic Answers Live. My name is Edgar Luhano, producer for the show here, filling in for Cy Kellett as he makes his way around beautiful, snowy South Dakota. So say a prayer for him as he bundles up and warms up because his San Diego blood is quite thin out there. But for today's show, we have 2 full hours with Joe Heschmeyer. He is the host of the Shameless Popery podcast, along with author of a gang of books, including the newest, The Eucharist is Really Jesus. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. Well, if you have a question for Joe, you can go ahead and give us a call at 888-318-7884. That's 888-31-TRUTH. It's an Ask Me Anything Day with Joe. How are things on the shameless front, or the shameless popery front, shall I say?
I'm happy. I did episodes recently on baptism, and I've got an episode coming up tomorrow on the lazy dogmatism of Sam Harris. So if you're familiar with Sam Harris, he was one of the so-called 4 horsemen of New Atheism. And he is on this constant kick about how religious people are just led by dogma and not reason. And you can tell this because they don't have falsifiable claims. And none of that is right. And his idea of falsification is coming from a thinker by the name of Karl Popper. And Popper, actually, in the book in question, talks about how not to understand things. And it's exactly all the things Sam Harris is doing. And so Popper, back in 1959, accused thinkers very much like Sam Harris of a sort of intellectual laziness and of having this kind of dogma where only science was true. And it's really startling to see someone, from half a century, more than half a century at this point ago, correctly diagnosing so many things that the modern world is getting wrong. And it's thought that it's hopefully, it was fun for me to make. Hopefully it's fun for other people to consume tomorrow, to just think about like, oh yeah, this is exactly the kind of error that is very widespread in the modern world, of imagining faith is just irrational belief and that we need to just have the facts and that these are just things we can find and empirically test. And that's not how real life works at all. That is a small part of certain parts of the natural sciences. That is not the way anyone, believer or non-believer, lives their life, because that's an absurd vision of reality.
Do you find that mindset is still fairly prevalent and still growing in the world today, or do you think that's kind of an idea that's starting to go away and other arguments are coming up?
Yeah, okay, that's a very good question. So the thing that got me to make this response video was a thing he did for the YouTube channel Big Think. And that had like 500,000 views in like 4 days. So it's not fringe. It's not obscure. I do see some signs. I think the new atheists are increasingly kind of gauche. They're out of date. They're kind of cringy. It's, the neck-bearded guy with the fedora who is doing the actually. And I think increasingly even other non-religious people look at that and roll their eyes and realize that there's something kind of, this is not the bold and exciting stance it might have seemed to be in 2004. This is something where it's like, if you're still making the same arguments 20 years later, as Sam Harris is, and people have responded to them and you've ignored all of those responses for 20 years as if you haven't noticed them, you are not a brilliant intellectual. You're just not. Like, that is not how an authentic intellectual navigates in any kind of discipline. And so I think the idea that like, okay, go back 20 years, and it's fair to say there were a lot of outspoken, kind of ignorant Christian voices. And then you had these scientists who came in and said, actually, and it did look like a David and Goliath kind of situation. But now there are a lot of brilliant, outspoken Christians or people who are maybe adjacent to Christianity who really reject everything that the new atheists have been peddling. And the new atheists haven't done any of the intellectual work to kind of respond to those arguments. So they don't seem to understand philosophy or formal logic or any of these things. And it's no longer the impressive David and Goliath situation that they might have found themselves in, at this point, almost a quarter century ago.
Wasn't Richard Dawkins one of those 4 horsemen?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and didn't he recently say something about the world needs Christianity or in not so many words?
Yeah, so this is a really fascinating thing. Dawkins hates the truth claims of Christianity, But this is one of the things that they were completely just look. The four horsemen of the New Atheism, and more broadly, a lot of the leading lights of New Atheism, are people who, by and large, understand certain sciences very well, but are clueless about the way the world actually works, and basically any discipline outside of science. They're not well-read. They're not deeply versed in philosophy. They don't know history. And so they imagined, very naively, that they could just fight to push Christianity out, and that therefore people would become very rational, non-dogmatic sort of thinkers. No one who understands human psychology or has read any of history is going to lead to that kind of conclusion. It isn't as if after you have the French Revolution in, 1789, that you then have this great era of peace. No, when you create those kind of vacuums, intellectually, power vacuums, whatever it is, what happens isn't the rise of brilliant, above sinfulness kind of free thinking. No, what happens is something else fills the void. In the French Revolution case, it's a guy by the name of Napoleon. In the American political scene, I think you could argue everything from wokeism to Trumpism has rushed into this space that was vacated in large part by Christianity. And I don't say that is just like an indictment. I mean, like, people want a creed. They want something to believe in, and they'll find it somewhere. And the New Atheists thought that they could just say, like, science, and that was going to be a satisfactory kind of creed. But for anyone who has a rich interior life of any kind, just knowing how particles work is not going to satisfy the deeper questions of life. And so, ironically, this is one of the things Karl Popper warned against in 1959, that the people who think that the sciences are all there is tend to not understand why any of those other questions matter, like what the meaning of life is, and they treat them like pseudo questions because they're not questions they know how to answer. And that's exactly what the New Atheists did. Like, why would you ask where the universe came from? Why would you ask what life's meaning is? And it's like, no, that is not intellectually satisfying, not just not spiritually satisfying. Like, that is an intellectual cop-out. And I think people have responded to that.
Well, there you have it. You got a little glimpse of Shameless Popery podcast. So if you have a little desire to dig deeper, make sure you check that out. Shameless Popery, shamelessjoe.com. And you can also check out his YouTube channel. Just type in Shameless Popery there. That's the visuals are great. So his podcast producer is doing a great job on that front. So with that, we do have a couple lines open. If you want to ask Joe a question, you can call us at 888-318-7884. With that, we go to Levi in Virginia, watching on Catholic.com. Levi, welcome to the show.
Thank you for taking my call. Peace be with you.
And with your spirit.
All right. First of all, I just want to say, Joe, thank you for all of your work, because my question has to do with one of your pieces of work.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
Okay. Although it's not an episode of the acclaimed podcast Shameless Popery, which you guys can find episodes for every Tuesday and Thursday on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.
There you go. Clip that out.
Short episode on Tuesday. Get
there
the
you
long,
go. I don't even need to do it anymore. I love it.
Okay. But Joe, your work, as well as a lot of other works in the Catholic sphere, have really impacted me as somebody who was pretty much born and raised into a good Baptist family. Although I would consider myself to be, and this is my own terminology, a de jure Baptist and not a de facto one.
I appreciate
primarily
that very nerdy distinction. Yeah.
Okay. Well, a lot of this comes from the fact that, by the grace of God, through a lot of your work, I have come to accept more and more of the dogmas and specific claims of the Catholic Church. For instance, infant baptism, baptism for regeneration, as well as the case for the sacraments as well. But here is where we get to the tricky part. You wrote an article that was titled "Avoid Converting to Save Relationships," and this kind of ties into my question. Although I have not fully decided on whether or not, the Catholic Church is, where it's at. The truth of the matter is, I've pretty much been born and raised in a good Baptist family, and a lot of this kind of view of Christianity is what I've grown up and raised around. You know, the idea of just leaving that behind and, you know, kind of making this big thing is just kind of scary, if not almost a little bit like you're betraying people, you know. So I just, the situation is really my question.
Yeah, well, first of all, praise God for your openness, because it's very clear that you're someone who's been seeking spiritually, and it seems like the Lord has been responding to that in beautiful and gracious ways. And I'm very grateful for any role I've played kind of on that journey. This is one of those questions where I think Jesus has hard words, and I'm going to give Jesus his words and then add a few of my own. So in Luke 12, Jesus says, beginning in verse 49, I came to cast fire upon the earth, and would that it were already kindled. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how I am constrained until it is accomplished. Do you think that I have come to give peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. For henceforth in one house there will be 5 divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. They'll be divided, father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against her mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. So I start that to say, we have to be willing to follow Jesus in the way that he is calling us to follow him, even if that causes some ripples in the family. And that's something that, as a Catholic, you have to do. You know, that, for instance, you might have a case where a young man discerns that God is calling him to discern the priesthood, and he's the only son in the family. This is not my own story, by the way. He's the only son in the family, and mom really wants grandkids, and, you know, dad wants the name carried on. And so there's a lot of pressure put on him not to go into seminary. You find this even amongst Catholics, and you have to be willing to take the stand, even if you know it might cause some pain in the family. Or you have a case where you say, I can't in good conscience go to this wedding because I don't think it's a real wedding. And I know this is going to cause a real problem in my relationship with my sister. And I don't want that. I love my sister. But I'm going to follow Jesus in the way I believe he's calling me, even if it comes at a certain cost. So this is one thing Jesus is very clear about in following him. Now, having said that, if I may, I'd like to speak a few words into the situation you find yourself in. Most of evangelicalism is not counter to Catholicism. Like, if you think about it, if you're coming from a different religion and you believed in false gods or something like this, then it's true. You would have to abjure those false gods and say, I don't believe in Baal anymore. I believe in God. But in the case of evangelicalism, even though we often focus on where we differ, and, you know, I certainly do this as well, partly to show the distinctive nature of Catholicism, the reality that we don't want to miss is there is this common love of God, a common love of Jesus, a common belief in the Trinity. And so there is much that is true, good, and beautiful in evangelical Protestantism, which, by the way, it has gotten from Catholicism. The things we differ about are those elements of Protestantism that are very young, and those things you can reject without rejecting all of the good stuff. There's a great book by a Protestant turned Catholic priest by the name of Louis Boyer, Bouyer, I think it is, called The Spirit and Forms of Protestantism. And he makes the case that there's a lot of vibrant spiritual life in Protestantism, but that if you trace it back, you realize that these are things that they inherited from their Catholic ancestry. So it's not a matter of rejecting your evangelical roots. I would suggest it's a matter of digging even deeper and finding that everything good in your evangelical roots was itself rooted in Catholicism, was itself something that, you know, Protestants didn't just invent or create, but something that they preserved and maybe cultivated from their Catholic heritage. Does that make sense, Levi?
Yes, it does.
All right. Great. All right, Levi, thank you so much for your call. We're going to go ahead and leave that right there because we have to go to our first break. So there's going to be one line open. So if you want to go ahead and give us a call and talk to Joe, we have 2 full hours, so there's going to be plenty of time to talk to him. So go ahead and give us a call at 888-318-7884.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment. Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Hi, this is Mike Aquilina with a few words about St. Agnes of Rome. She was a teen or tween when she refused a marriage proposal. She could not marry because she had consecrated herself to Jesus. Her jilted suitor denounced her as a Christian, and she was condemned. Agnes's courage in facing death was a major factor in the conversion of Rome.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Ask Me Anything Catholicism edition, because what else would it be on Catholic Answers Live, right? So we're here with Joe Heschmeyer doing these 2 full hours, and we're going to go back to the calls because there's plenty to go through. We go to Audrey in Denver, Colorado, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Audrey, welcome to the show. You are live with Joe Heschmeyer.
Thank you so much for taking my call. So before I get to my question, I had a proposal for your next fundraising campaign.
Okay.
A couple years ago, Joe, you mentioned on an Ask Me Anything for RCIA that you don't have to go through Catholic Jeopardy in order to enter the Catholic Church. But I think that would actually be a fantastic fundraising idea for you guys. Have
Catholic
Jimmy
Jeopardy?
Akin play Alex Trebek and you and
Oh, my
Trent
gosh.
and pick your favorite third.
I'll tell
I
you,
think that
my
would be
favorite
amazing.
part of this is that Jimmy is playing Alex Trebek, so no one has to play against him, because I think the rest of us would be at a serious disadvantage. I don't think anyone would be offended by me saying his knowledge of trivia, of all stripes, but especially Catholic trivia, is impressive.
But my actual question was, what is your favorite Advent tradition and why?
Oh, gosh. I love
As a shameless
Advent.
papist.
Thank you.
Plug.
I love Advent. It's one of those seasons that's so short where it feels like once I'm really experiencing it, it's over. And maybe that's one of the things I like about it. But it's such a beautiful spirit of preparation. And so especially with kids, the thing, my wife has been very good about this, is doing Advent candles. And I would suggest anyone listening now, start looking for Advent candles right now. They are weirdly hard to find, and you might have to go online because I naively thought I could just go to Walmart or something. And instead you get these like so-called Advent calendars that are actually just the calendar of the first 25 days of December. And it's like, what if Advent isn't December 1st to the 25th? What do you do then? It's like Advent calendars by people who don't know what Advent is. It's painful. So we do a combination of things. We do a little Advent wreath with the Advent candles. And so then we gather around in the evening and the kids get to help light the candles, which they really like. And then we say a few prayers. And then at the end, my wife always has us get the Trader Joe's Advent calendar, which I think also has often the wrong number of days, but has chocolate. So then we open that up and let the kids split one of the little chocolates. So it's, they're not indulging so much that it ruins the preparatory nature of it, but it does make them really look forward to, we're kind of bribing them into prayer, probably. Once I say it out loud, it's like, oh yeah, there's a little bit of bribery there, but they love it. It's something they look forward to. They get chocolate and fire and a time to pray together. So it's a really beautiful, serene kind of moment in the evening. And I've got a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So beautiful and serene are not always the ways I describe the period right before bed. So I have some ulterior motives perhaps, but those are my favorite traditions there.
How's that, Audrey?
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much for your
thank
call.
you for asking that.
Yeah, I'm going to give you my 2 cents too, because why not?
Yeah, please.
The
I
Hispanic.
almost asked Audrey, but I didn't know if it was going to take the whole thing in a totally different direction.
I would say if you live in an area where there's a lot of Hispanics, make sure you join the tradition of posadas. They're a lot of fun, especially during Advent. Yeah.
Remind me what this is. I've heard of this. I don't know what it is.
So it's in preparation for the coming of Jesus. Obviously, it's for Advent, but they do gatherings at different homes throughout Advent. I typically see them on weekends. Sometimes you'll see them during the weekdays. But you go to somebody's house, and then there's like a little back and forth between Jesus and Mary looking for a place to stay, stay at the end. And then it becomes like this little celebration. Kids are involved. They tend to dress up, and then there's a Mexican sweetbread and, hot chocolate. And it just becomes a really fun tradition, and just kind of the anticipation for Christmas. So it's always fun. So if you live in an area with a lot of Hispanics, go to your parish, talk to them, because I know a lot of times they'll talk about them where they're going to do the next one. So highly recommend
awesome.
that.
Is that a specifically Mexican or all kind of Latin American?
I don't know. I know the Mexicans do it. I don't know what the rest do. So I'll leave it at that.
See, if you group all Latin Americans as Mexican, you get away with it. But if I do it,
that's true.
No, okay, it says I just looked on Wikipedia: El Salvador, Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and then I didn't click on the link.
Perfect.
So it looks like at least Mexico and Central America.
Perfect.
If I can add one more tradition.
Go for it.
One thing that a lot of people do wrong, so this is my chance to get up on my soapbox a little bit. When you make the nativity scene, don't put Jesus in the manger yet. So prepare the entire nativity scene and then leave the middle empty to remind us that we're waiting for Jesus. Now, what some people do as well is they'll have the wise men off, maybe somewhere else in the room where they're coming from afar, and people who are really ambitious and are better at remembering to do things every day will even move them a little bit every day. That is not where we are in our life right now, because things we just leave out get moved around or destroyed. What I have found on a very practical level, Fontanini is a brand of Italian nativity scenes that they do wax resin that look nice, and they're very durable. So if they get, for instance, dropped, or if the animals start fighting, if you have, for instance, a 3-year-old boy, they can put up with a fair amount of stress, we'll say.
Perfect. All right, Audrey, thank you so much for your question. From there, we're going to go to I can't even say it, anonymous caller in Illinois watching on Catholic.com. Welcome to the show, Anonymous.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. My question is it okay to listen to music that have like a theme of I can't even say that word either. We're on the same boat, but
right.
Loneliness?
Yeah. So this is a good question, because we should, when we're considering any kind of music, sometimes people will think about just the lyrics, but the structure of the music itself has this incredible role that it plays on the soul. And this is something that was recognized by both the ancient Greeks, figures like Plato, but also by the early Christians. So like St. Basil talks about this. This is one of the reasons, by the way, for the Psalms. He explains that this is like one of the ways God is communicating things to us with like this music, that we can better internalize these things. So what we should take away from that is music has this incredible power that goes beyond where logic can go. That when you think about a logical argument, you hear the argument and you can kind of logically analyze the different parts of it and say, I agree with that or I don't agree with that. Well, the way music works tonally is it reaches to the level of the soul sort of directly. And so you can find like children, even pre-verbal infants, who are moved to tears by these hauntingly beautiful songs. Or you'll hear a song in another language that maybe you don't speak at all. The Dies Irae has this power to move you, even if you don't know what the words mean. O Fortuna, there's any Cucurucucu Paloma in Spanish. I mean, I didn't know what that meant. Turns out it's just the sound a dove makes. And those kind of songs have this incredible pull on the soul, even if you don't understand them lyrically. So we should take that very seriously and recognize that can be good or bad. Now, all of the emotions are gifts from God. Anger is a gift. Loneliness is a gift. These things, as strange as that is to say, all of the emotions, like the whole realm of emotional palette, is something that is God-given, but it can be distorted, and you have to respond to certain emotions, especially strong and seemingly negative emotions, in a proper way. And that proper way isn't just bottling them up, but it's also not just dwelling on them. And so when you're feeling really bad, sometimes you want to listen to music just to feel worse about yourself, and I would be very cautious about that. Other times, maybe hearing something sad actually helps bring you out of it, because it's almost like you've found a little bit of empathy. Someone else has met your experience, and you feel a little less alone in the world. So I would suggest with any of this music, be aware lyrically and structurally, what's its impact on your soul? What is it doing to you?
All right, Anonymous, thank you so much for your call. Really appreciate it. Go ahead and give us a call back whenever you have another question for us. And we'll be right back right after this break with Joe Heschmeyer.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun. And that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
From its earliest days, Catholic faith has been lived by a yearly cycle of feasts and seasons. The new book from Mike Aquilina and Adam Lucas, Feasts of Our Fathers, is a one-stop companion for praying and meditating through the holy days and seasons of the Church with help from the most ancient Christian people. Don't just read about the early saints, pray with them. Order your copy of Feasts of Our Fathers now at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. My name is Edgar Lujano. I'm filling in for Cy Kellett. I'm one of the CA producers here for the live show. So if you ever call us, you're usually talking to me before I let you through with Cy and Joe and Jimmy and whoever else is on. But today, I fill in, and just with me next to me is another person who tends to fill in for the show. Thomas, what's up?
You all thought you were rid of me, but I came back for one last little segment on this show.
Just need to seep over from yesterday, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I had to keep on creeping onto this auditory airspace.
But today you wear a different hat.
I do.
A TikTok hat.
Quite literally, I wear the beanie, which I'm only allowed to wear as Thomas the TikTok Engine. But, that's fine. I'm all for ritual and decor that's appropriate to the
tradition.
Setting. Exactly. Another reason for you to watch the show, if you don't already, by the way, just to see which Thomas is in the studio today.
There you go.
Right?
Well,
and also to see what Joe's wearing, because I'm not going to describe it to you. You just got to see it for yourself. It's quite tremendous.
Yeah, if you're on the app or in your car listening to the radio, make sure you go back to the YouTube channel and look at his shirt. It's something.
Not while you're driving.
Not while you're driving. For more reasons than one, it will probably cause you to crash.
Exactly. All right, go ahead.
All right. Now that we're done pushing the YouTube channel so hard, Joe, the TikTok question I brought for you today. This person says, why didn't Jesus explain exactly how things should be instead of speaking in parables? Explaining clearly would have, I think, eliminated all of these other religions.
I would respond to that by saying there are plenty of times where Jesus speaks pretty plainly and pretty directly, and we still see other religions. I mean, there are plenty of times where, for instance, the Catholic Church has applied Jesus' teaching in explicit, direct sort of ways, and we still see other religions. So I don't think Jesus not using parables would have gotten rid of other religions. I don't think that's why people reject his teachings or misunderstand him. But why then does he speak in parables? I think part of that gets to the heart of what it is Jesus is doing. The point of Christianity is not just to have new information, and the point of God coming into the world isn't just to provide new data. He could do that any number of ways. It's much more relational, and what he's seeking from us isn't just knowledge, which is the point of sharing data. He's seeking a relationship, which is where faith comes in. And so the way the parables work, it's brilliant, because if you don't love him, if you don't trust him, if you're not going to give him the benefit of the doubt, if you're not going to take him seriously, you can hear the parable and get nothing out of it. But if you're willing to throw yourself at his feet, throw yourself upon him, trust him completely, and try to learn and listen from him, sit at his feet, right? Then you'll find endless numbers of teaching that you couldn't just summarize in one sentence. Like the number of times you might hear the same parable, say, the parable of the talents, and you get something new and rich out of it that you didn't get before. That you're not going to be able to do that by just giving 10 commandments about the talents. It doesn't work like that. That rather this is a perennial source, that the more you devote yourself to him, the more you grow both in the relationship and in the knowledge. So it's a pretty brilliant way that he presents the faith.
Great. Thanks a lot, Joe. I'll throw that back on TikTok, and I hope they keep coming back to it and digging more and more riches out of that answer.
I should have given it in the story instead.
Yeah. Tell us a story about your kids next time.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks for joining. Appreciate that. All right. We're going to go back to the phones because there's plenty of people on the line. All the lines are full, which is always a good sign. Christine in Las Vegas, Nevada, watching on YouTube. Christine, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Go right ahead.
Yes. So, Joe, my question is, there's a lot of self-help books out there about negative thinking and negative thought patterns, and it's from like your subconscious and how you grew up and how it affects you in your life and how successful you are. And I'm wondering if those who are like in a state of sin, are they more affected by negative thoughts than people who are in a state of grace? And like, how are there resources out there like from our faith that talk about subconscious minds, and do they go together, or is it just spiritual with us?
I see.
Sorry, I can't articulate it better, but
no, I think you've articulated it pretty well. So is it the sort of the self-tearing down sort of thoughts? Is that what you mean by negative thoughts? Because, I mean, negative thoughts could mean a number of things. Like, it could mean, like, sinful desires, or it could mean something like, you're not good enough, you're not worthwhile. What kind of thing do you have in mind?
Yeah, like, thoughts of, like, you're not good enough, and, you like, paralyzing, where you don't go out, take risks, or you don't achieve goals because you're so down on yourself. And then, relationships in the future, how you grew up and how you saw your parents, and it kind of just trickles down into your life, and you're perpetuating the same relationships, which you don't want to sabotage.
You've given me a very clear example, and I think you've given me a good kind of doorway to the situation too, because a lot of what's coming in there is sort of the role of what we call family of origin. Like, what were your parents like? What was your family dynamic like when you were growing up? Because a lot of what you learn about how to operate in the world, you're getting at a very young age. And so if you saw dysfunctional ways of operating, and I won't ask you to share anything too personal on the air, but if you saw dysfunctional ways of operating, you learned the wrong way to do it. In the same way that if, let's say, you had parents who had terrible grammar, you might struggle your whole life with conjugating sentences because in your formative years, you learn it wrong and have to constantly correct yourself. I didn't get the E and the I vowel sounds. I think I've only got myself to blame there, but I was kid number 4. So people tease me because I pronounce the word UNTIL like Intel. So I say until. And it's, my mom, dad's from Alabama, so there's maybe a little bit of that in there. Those kind of things at a very simple level. We can think of any number of things where you say, oh, I know why I did that. I did that because of my experience in childhood. And there's probably way more things than that we don't even know about. Well, spiritually, that plays a role as well. Because if you were formed in a way where you interact badly with the world around you, or you were formed in such a way that you emerged with this sense of your own worthlessness, that can be something that haunts you in an ongoing sort of way, and that has to be healed. That's not just a spiritual problem. Like, there's a psychological thing going on there, and it certainly has spiritual implications, right? The devil is the enemy of human nature. That's what St. Ignatius calls him. And the enemy of human nature, he hates us. He hates that God made us, and he wants us to feel really cruddy about ourselves. God never wants that. He may want our conversion. He may want us to stop doing certain things, but look at the way Jesus approaches sinners with this gentleness and compassion. He approaches them with this tremendous sense that he loves them and sees value in them even at their worst. In contrast, even if you're not in sin, the devil will try to tell you, well, you're not good enough. You're not brave enough. You're not this enough. You're not your neighbor enough. You're not somebody else enough. And will constantly try to tear you down for that. And that is a voice to recognize and resist, because you recognize it to say, okay, that is not coming from God. If there's one verse I would give you, it's John 14:27, where Jesus says, peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give peace to you, nor let your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. So earlier in this hour, I shared where Jesus talked about how he came not to bring peace but the sword. And you might say, well, how could those two things both be true? Because he doesn't come to give like worldly peace where it's the peace of indifference. You just live and let live by sacrificing your principles, or the peace of domination where the weak are under the strong. No, Christ's peace is something else. It's a rightly ordered peace where everything and everyone is where they ought to be. And so allowing yourself to see yourself more the way Jesus sees you, and to be loved in the way that Jesus loves you, can be a good first step towards healing those things. I would be remiss as the husband of a marriage and family therapist not to also mention that things like therapy and EMDR kind of therapies in particular can be really effective in helping people break free sometimes from old wounds, maybe wounds they weren't even aware of how much of a role they had. And then finally, in terms of spiritual resources, there's a lot of good resources out there. Maybe a nice short thing would be Father Jacques Philippe has a whole series of works, and he talks a lot about interior freedom and about peace and these good themes that might help you reclaim your sense as a beloved daughter of God.
Thank you so much.
Is that helpful, Christine? Yeah.
Yes, I have a lot of Father Jacques Philippe's books already.
Oh, good. Well, the
so
other book I was thinking about, but I don't know if it's too, well, I'm not sure if it's quite on point, but The Fire Within by Father Thomas Dubé is another one that I think is quite good. It's a spiritual treatise, but it talks at one point, discerning the psychological from the spiritual, and it has some good tools in there, but I'm really recommending like 5% of the book, and I'm not sure if the other 95% would really be on point. So do with that, I guess, what you will.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for your call, Christine. Really appreciate that. We're going to go ahead to our last break of the hour, and when we come back, we'll go through the rest of the calls because the lines continue to stay full. I'm not going to give the number out because, like I said, they're full. So we'll be right back after this break.
Hang on. We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and His gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
A Another great podcast on EWTN Podcast Central is The Catholic Sportsman Show. Randy and Paul discuss professional, college, and youth sports topics from our Catholic Christian perspective. You can hear this and other faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates around the EWTN Podcast Central. Visit EWTN.com/radio and click on Podcast Central today.
Catholic Answers Live. As you know, for the last, I think, few weeks, we've been pitching our Catholic Answers calendar, the 2025 calendar. So we've been highlighting a different artist every single day. Today, we're going to highlight the November's image, which is by the image is Christ the King by Gwyneth Thompson Briggs. She's a contemporary sacred artist in the perennial Western tradition. She is dedicated in particular to reviving techniques from the Renaissance and Baroque eras to reveal the glory of God in the midst of today's crisis. Her art decorates churches, schools, private homes throughout the Americas and Europe. So if you want your copy of the Catholic Answers calendar, make sure you go to Catholic.com. There's an orange banner at the top of the page, and you should be able to get it. So go ahead and check that out. All right, Joe, shall we jump back in?
Yeah, please.
All right, we go to our friend Emma in Hayden, Idaho, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Emma, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Two of my favorite people, Edgar and Joe.
Make sure you say that when Sai is on, okay?
I will.
When he has somebody besides me on, you should be like, you know who two of my favorite people are? Edgar and Joe. He'll love it.
That's right.
He'll love it.
All of a sudden.
Don't quote me on that.
Oh, just like that. Okay, do we have any idea what it means when Gabriel told Mary that the Spirit of God would overshadow her?
We do. I'm very glad you asked that.
Oh, you do?
Yes. So, first, when we talk about overshadowing, the Greek word being used there is the same Greek word used, well, on the one hand, when St. Peter's shadow falls on people and heals them in Acts 5, but it's also the Greek word used in two other contexts that are really fascinating. One, the overshadowing cloud in the Transfiguration in Mark 9, but then the parallel passages of the Transfiguration as well. But more interestingly, in the Greek translation of Exodus 40. So the overshadowing, so in the Transfiguration, just to clarify that, you have the cloud, which is how the Holy Spirit is presenting himself. And you have the voice, which is the Father. And then you have Christ in glory. So it's this Trinitarian vision. Well, him going up the mount with the two disciples very much also looks like Moses going up the mount to meet God, except here what they're seeing isn't that this is a great prophet who speaks face to face with God, but that he's that and is also God himself. So there's a whole beautiful thing going on there with the Transfiguration. But the cloud recalls Exodus, because remember, in the Exodus, the Israelites were led by a pillar of cloud. And so there's this whole motif of the pillar of cloud leading the Israelites through the Red Sea and the parting of the Red Sea. In 1 Corinthians 10, St. Paul describes this as baptism into Moses, because it's water plus the Holy Spirit, which are the two ingredients of baptism. But the last place that we see this overshadowing word is in the Greek translation, as I said, of Exodus 40. In Exodus 40, when talking about the Ark of the Covenant, it says in verse 29 that there was an overshadowing of the Ark. And so this is one of the things, when we talk about Mary being the Ark of the New Covenant, the way that she is described, that the Holy Spirit overshadows her, and this is where the conception of Jesus comes from, is very much the way the presence of the Lord is described in the Ark of the Covenant, where there is this spiritual overshadowing. And that becomes clearer, as I say, in the Septuagint, the Greek translation, because it's the same Greek word being used in both cases. Does that help?
Good. Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Sure thing. Well,
Okay.
thanks for
You
your call,
guys
Emma.
take care.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you so much. With that, we go over to Michael in Buffalo, New York on YouTube. Michael, go right
I
ahead.
can't talk to someone from Buffalo this week. It's too painful.
It's too painful. It hurts too much. Buffalo.
As a Chiefs fan, yeah, no, go ahead. Sorry, Michael.
Michael, you might hurt his feelings a little bit, but we're going to let you on. Go ahead.
Well, thank you for taking my call. Joe, I actually met you a few years ago here in Buffalo at Our Lady of Victory Basilica at the Catholic Answers booth.
Beautiful church, by the way, which I was stunned by.
It
I was
is.
not expecting that level of beauty.
It is. Well, I have a few questions for you. I'm a catechist here in Buffalo, and we often get Protestants that are converting. And when it comes to certain objections, we get to a point where we'll start talking about the early church and what we believe now was believed in the early church. And often we'll get resistance when it comes to proving the papacy, where the line after Peter, from Peter to the line right after that, it can't be proven that it was Catholic. Oh, and then I'll often get objections that the Catholic Church was corrupted at the First Council of Nicaea. How would you explain that to a Protestant, that what we believe now was what the earliest church fathers believed?
Well, I don't know if you intended this or not, but I'm going to make sure if you stay on the line, you get a copy of my book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, because I have a book-length answer to that question. But the short form is, we know from early Christian writings what the early Christians believed. Many, not just many Protestants, many Americans more broadly, have this vague sort of understanding that, like, oh yeah, everything was super disorganized, and there were all of the, people were just kind of doing their own thing. They're reading the Bible, and they have these very specific kind of visions of what early Christianity was like. And you ask them, like, well, what is that based on? Like, show me a document that points to that. And it's not. It's just based on these kind of vibes, or this kind of cultural knowledge that somebody told them that, and somebody had told them that, and so on. And it's not really rooted in anything. And then you go and read the early Christians, and you're like, oh, wow, no, they're incredibly, incredibly Catholic. You take St. Justin Martyr from about 160, and he writes about the structure of the Mass, and you can read that as a Catholic and say, yep, we still do that, we still do that, we still do that. This thing might be in a different place, we still do that. The sign of peace might be in a different spot. Yeah, this is clearly the Mass. And so you look at those things and you think, okay, clearly. Or go 20 years later to the year 180. Irenaeus of Lyon, writing in Against Heresies, when he traces who every pope was, down to Eleutherius, who was pope in 180. And it's just like, okay, it's right there. This wasn't something they were just making up a minute ago. They are saying, we got this stuff from the apostles, and they're just preserving it. So that leaves us with two possibilities. Either on the one hand, the earliest known Christians outside the Bible were not reliable witnesses that could be trusted. And if that's true, we're in trouble, because those are the same people who tell us which books are in the Bible. Or the earliest known witnesses outside the Bible can be trusted. That doesn't mean they couldn't get this or that wrong, but we largely can trust them as preservers of the truth. And therefore, when they tell you the apostles taught this thing, it's pretty good evidence that the apostles taught that thing. And then the last thing I'd say is, in Matthew 13, in the parable of the mustard seed, Jesus talks about the kingdom of God as a mustard seed that grows into a mustard tree. So that means when you're looking for the kingdom of God on earth, we should be looking, or kingdom of heaven is presented in Matthew's gospel, the kingdom of heaven on earth. You shouldn't be trying to artificially recreate your idea of what the first century church was like. That's just based on kind of a vague sense from the Acts of the Apostles or from a show you watched. You should be saying, where in history do we see what Jesus starts through the apostles, and how does that grow and mature for 2,000 years, and where can I find that? And if you take that question seriously, and you really start to say, like, where did the church founded by Jesus end up? I don't think you stay Protestant very long when you actually do that digging.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, my pleasure. Like I said, stay on the line and we'll get you a copy of the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a huge compliment, because you being in Buffalo and him giving you a book, that's like an olive branch.
I already gave you a W, now you're going to get a book as well.
There you go.
So.
The olive branch has been extended. All right, Michael, stay on the line. I will go ahead and get you that book. We move over to, well, you know what? We're going to stay in New York just for you, Joe. We're going to Thomas in New York watching on YouTube. Thomas, welcome to the show.
Hi, actually, not just from New York, also from Buffalo.
Beautiful.
I think that two of you, that counts as a herd, right?
I know. I was lost for a second there. I thought they just got my name wrong. But God bless you, Joe. I'm a big fan of the podcast, but I kind of want to move quickly on this question. It's a little bit deeper. It revolves around the Olivet discourses. So particularly in Mark 13, it's a little bit deeper because I already know, obviously the controversy around this generation, stuff like that, already had some answers to that. Particularly, generally the best one that I found is that we kind of affirm a partial preterism.
Yes.
He's talking here about the destruction of the temple, but really this is a type for the end of the world. Now that's cool. That makes sense to me. Heard that, sat on it for a bit. My problem is you come across parallel passages. For example, in Matthew 25:31, Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven coming in glory, right? This is the same language that we read about in Mark 13. So my question is, do I have to turn to someone, right? And I have to say, okay, well here, in Mark 13, when Jesus is talking about the kingdom of heaven coming with glory, really he's just talking about the temple. But here, in Matthew 25:31, when he's talking about the kingdom of heaven in glory, or coming in glory, he's talking about the end of the world. Because Matthew 25:31, is very obviously talking about the coming of the eschaton. That was my question. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so one of the things is that there is, if you will, a miniature judgment. There is sort of a judgment on Israel that's happening in 70 AD. And Jesus had foretold that this would happen. So if you go back to, for instance, Matthew chapter 15, when Jesus talks about the sign of, Matthew 16, when Jesus talks about the sign of Jonah. And he says that an evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign shall be given to it except for the sign of Jonah. Two things to pick up there. Jonah's message was 40 days hence and Nineveh will be destroyed. And the generation that we talked about in Exodus was 40 years. So 40 years after Jesus says those words, you have the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which is, we totally underestimate the importance of that. We just think, the Jewish people were dispersed. But no, the temple is the visible place where heaven and earth meet. And so to have that shattered in this way is this divine judgment being visited in a way that is very hard to kind of shake when you understand temple theology. So what we see at 70 AD is a forerunner of what we will see in the last days, where there will be this great coming in glory. And you have even this separation, because if you remember Jesus' instructions, he tells them to flee to the hills. And so the Christians are spared the judgment. They're spared the destruction in 70 because Christ gave pretty specific warnings on that. So I think you see in that, if you want a dress rehearsal for the final judgment. And so tying that together, it makes sense that the language would have a parallel, because in both cases you have a sort of apocalypse. You have a sort of end of the world event, because a world was brought to an end in a way that we don't appreciate. Like Second Temple Judaism and even First Temple Judaism before it is all centered around the temple. And that is irretrievably lost in a way it will never exist again. That's hard to even wrap our minds around. 70 AD is the end of the road for an entire religious system. There are still people who practice Judaism, but it looks markedly different after that, because the heart of it is now gone in the way that it hadn't been before. And I think we miss that because we don't have the same appreciation maybe for the temple.
All right, Thomas, thank you so much for your call. We're going to have to end it right there, unfortunately, because there is the music, and that's the end of the first hour. So if you're on the line, stay on the line. That's Ava, Katie, Chris, Hunter. Stay on the line. We definitely want to take your questions in the second hour. And we will be having one line open. So if you want to go ahead and give us a call at 888-318-7884. That's 888-31-TRUTH. And when we come back, it'll be a whole other hour of an Ask Me Anything with Joe Heschmeyer. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. My name is Edgar Lujano, producer for Catholic Answers Live, usually call screener, and also in charge of Respuestas Católicas, which is the Spanish version of Catholic Answers. Joe, I don't know if you know this, but on Monday is the 1-year anniversary that we launched the Respuestas Católicas YouTube channel.
I only learned that in today's team meeting, so congratulations.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Feliz cumpleaños to Respuestas. You can tell I'm nailing it with the Spanish.
There we go.
So
I mean, you according to our channel, you speak great Spanish. You know, it's flawless.
Turns out AI helped ever so slightly with turning my answers into Spanish.
It's always fun looking at the comments and saying, "I didn't know Joe Heschmeyer spoke Spanish. This is great. Like, let's invite him to our parish." Like, well, hold on a second. Read the disclaimer. So, it's all translated, but it's fun. It's so cool to be able to expand that to the Spanish side of the world, and
actual good use of AI.
Exactly, it's a tool, right? It's a tool, and it's all about using the tool properly for the glory of God. And it's cool because there's a lot of bilingual people out there, and even the thing that I think we don't realize about us as Americans is people in other countries tend to speak 2 languages. They tend to learn English too outside of their own language because it's the language of commerce, right? It's the language of business. So especially in countries where they have a lot of tourism, they tend to learn English. So with that, people know of you, people know of Trent, people know of Jimmy in these Spanish-speaking countries. So it's really cool you open up the door and they get to get a little taste of both the English and the Spanish. So it's fun.
Yeah, I wish I did speak fluent Spanish. It is one of those things where I think my brother shared the stat with me yesterday, or a couple weeks ago rather, that 42% of the world uses 2 languages on a more than weekly basis. Like they're not just like they know high school French or something, but like they're regularly using 2+ languages, which is mind blowing.
Yeah.
And then my brother who lives in Spain is like, yeah, you never hear people here say they just aren't good at languages. That's really only Americans.
The sad thing, my wife and I just got back from Spain a couple of weeks ago, and she's learning Spanish. She's around my family, so she wants to practice it more and more. It was hilarious because we would go to restaurants and they would give me a Spanish menu and they would give her an English menu, and then whenever she would order, she'd put the effort into speaking Spanish, and the server would respond in English. It's like, well, you're kind of killing the fun.
It's a fascinating thing because oftentimes, most Europeans, English is better than your whatever language you speak on the side.
Yeah.
Like that just is the case. In some places, they just want to speed up the transaction. France is kind of famous for this, especially around Paris. You try to speak in French and they'll just pretend you were speaking in English. But Italians, they love it. If you speak Italian, they're so flattered by the fact that you bothered to learn Italian. That they will respond in Italian unless you're really struggling, and then they'll try to help you.
Yeah, that's true. I've had that same experience. Well, with that, we're going to go back to the calls because, Joe, it seems like you're just a popular guy on the internet. So we're going to go back to calls. We go to our friend Ava in Nova Scotia, Canada. She's watching on YouTube. Ava, welcome back. It's been a while.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call.
Mm-hmm.
I'm normally in Ontario, but I'm visiting my grandparents, so I'm in Nova Scotia today.
Nova Scotia is beautiful. I was just there this summer.
That's great. I was wondering, you know how the promise of the scapular is if you die wearing the scapular, you won't suffer eternal fire? I was wondering if someone was wearing the scapular when Jesus returned and the second coming came and they faced their judgment, would the promise apply that they wouldn't face eternal fire at the second coming, even though they didn't die, because that's when they faced their judgment?
So with the Brown Scapular, we have to separate a lot of history from a lot of mythology kind of around it. And the Brown Scapular is not a guarantee. Like, it's not a get out of hell free or get out of purgatory free card. I know you sometimes will hear like the so-called Sabbatine privilege. That is not something that the church actually teaches. That would make mincemeat of the whole belief in grace and faith and even, the role of works if you could just put on like special clothes and get around all of that. That rather, the proper use of the Brown Scapular is what's called the sacramental. And the Catechism talks about this directly in paragraph 1670, where it says sacramentals do not confer the grace of the Holy Spirit in the way that the sacraments do. but by the Church's prayer, they prepare us to receive grace and dispose us to cooperate with it. So they're not magical, nor are they sacraments in the full sense. They're sort of, if you will, adjacent to sacraments. So holy water works this way too. Any of the scapulars work this way, where they are religious items that are ordered towards faith and are meant to help us to remember, for instance, the promises that we made in our baptism, or, just to remind us of who we are as Christians and to help us in the spiritual life. But they don't get rid of the role of grace and of faith and of works or any of those things. They're not a substitute for that. So that's true both for those who die now, and it's true for those who will face Christ at the second coming. I think the best we can say with confidence is a properly used brown scapular or any sacramental is a sign that someone is already in a healthy spiritual relationship with God. And if they're using sacramentals well, those things are helping them to grow in that relationship in a way where they shouldn't be living just in fear of hell.
How's that, Eva?
Okay, thank you. So you're saying that it's if someone is already in a state of grace and they have a healthy spiritual life, the scapular is like a sign of that, and so it's basically the same whether you're wearing it when you die or if you don't die, but Jesus comes again?
Yeah, right. So this is not something that is a replacement for all of the ordinary tools of the spiritual life. I mean, if all that was necessary was wearing the brown scapular, it would make evangelization a lot easier, I suppose. But it wouldn't resemble very much the way Christianity looks in the Bible. Jesus doesn't just say, give people brown scapular and then they'll be good to go. So the brown scapular, like any tool in this sense, whether that's, a good spiritual book or an icon in your house or holy water, any of these things, those things can help us in the spiritual life, but not in a magical sort of way, but by how much we're disposed to respond to them. And so if you're disposed to respond to them, they can actually help you grow. It's not just a symbol. It's doing more than just reflecting that you already have a good spiritual life. It can help you grow in it, but only if you're kind of open to the devotional life in such a way that you're growing in relationship with Christ.
Okay, Eva?
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for your call. We're going to go to our first break of the hour, and then when we come back, we'll jump back into it. There's going to be one open line. You can call us at 888-318-7884.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
At EWTN Radio, your family. And because you're a part of our family, we value your opinions on what you hear on EWTN. You can call our listener comment line 24/7 at 205-795-5773. We value your comments, your questions, and any suggestions you may have to make EWTN Radio even better. 205-795-5773. And thank you for listening to EWTN Radio.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Ask Me Anything with Joe Heschmeyer, and we go back to the phones. We go to Josh in Florida. He's watching us on YouTube. Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey, guys. Can you all hear me?
Loud and clear. Go right ahead.
Awesome. Well, Joe, first I'd like to thank you for the work you do with your podcast every week. My friend and I love it, and it's played a huge role in his decision to become Catholic, and I have the privilege to sponsor him in the upcoming Easter Vigil. So, thank you for the role you've
congratulations.
played in that.
Do you want to share his first name so people can pray for him?
Jared.
All right.
Okay, cool.
Excellent. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and so to move on to my question, so I'm Catholic, and I fully agree with the Church's position on IVF.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had the question come up a lot with Protestant friends and family, And it's usually super easy to defend the church's position with the more obvious moral issues, like the creation and destruction of extra embryos, the eugenics rabbit hole, the means of obtaining material, all of that. But having said that, I know IVF would still be wrong, even if those issues were solved. I just don't have a great way to defend that yet. So in your opinion, what's the best way to defend the church's position without kind of the easier objections? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do. It does. And I've had that same conversation that you're describing before. So I would suggest three kind of approaches. The first is whether I believe the term is heterologous or homologous, whether, in other words, it's the husband sperm or the sperm of a third party. Or sometimes it'll even be a different, someone else will be the carrier for someone else's eggs. Like you'll have egg donation, or you have just total surrogates. You have all of these things that are totally distorting the marital act. So the first thing to recognize is, in the same way that birth control is wrong because it corrupts the nature of the marital act, in this case separating sex from procreation, IVF is the flip side of that coin, where it separates procreation from sex. That's just, even if it's the husband and wife genetically, you've now separated in this way that is totally contrary to the way that a man and woman express their unitive love. The idea is that the two become one flesh, and in that, the two becoming one, the two also become three. That's the unitive and the procreative. And this is even something people have pointed to as sort of triune, as sort of a very limited, obviously, but a sort of Trinitarian image, the two becoming one and the two becoming three. There's a threeness and a oneness to the unitive and procreative nature of the marital act. Now, that is, of course, totally separated if instead it's the creation of human beings in a lab somewhere and then being implanted. So a child deserves to not be manufactured in a lab, would be the second kind of thing I would say on that. And this becomes all the more true when you get in those more complicated cases where it's either not the dad or not the mom's genetic materials. It's bizarre to me, but you have these cases where, I mean, recently I was approached with a case where the guy was worried about a history of disease in his family. And so he wanted to help pay for some other man to inseminate his wife's eggs so that she could be pregnant. That is such a bizarre thing to even have to explain to someone why that is not healthy in a marriage, or why that's not, like, go adopt a child. Like, there are plenty of ways to have a child if you can't genetically, or you don't feel safe with, carrying on dangerous genes in your family, whatever, go adopt, right? So that's the second thing I'd say, is a child deserves better than to be manufactured in a lab. And particularly in an age in which there are plenty of children who are in need of adoption, it's strange and heartbreaking that we're still insisting that we need to do this. And then the third thing I would say, just at a practical level, is IVF is a horrible industry. Like, these are people who, whether anyone's killing your particular children or not, they are in the industry of producing more unborn children in laboratories than will ever be brought to birth. And they know this, and they produce a lot of them, and then they'll implant more than they need because they don't have a 100% success rate. And if the woman's body is open to all, let's say they implant 3 or 4, and then she's pregnant either with 3 children at the same time, who aren't really triplets because they're separately conceived, they're kind of like triplets. Then they'll say, well, how many of the kids do you want to keep? And then they'll get rid of the children that she decides she doesn't want. They're the wrong gender, or they've got the wrong genetic profile for some reason. And so they're in the business of abortion and of eugenics. And so the idea that, like, good pro-life Protestants are throwing their money into these industries, many of the same people who would never darken the doorstep of a Planned Parenthood, even for a pap smear, is mind-boggling. Like, it is cooperation in a wretched industry that should not exist. So I would suggest, even if you don't understand teleology, even if you don't understand that sex has a nature and that procreation and sex belong together, even if you've missed all of that from Genesis and from biology, you should at least hopefully say, I don't want to do business with people who are butchers. What would you say to that, Josh?
Yeah, no, that all makes sense, and I think listen, that's the part that I haven't really had much issue with. I think like talking to people, because I think a lot of people concede that. The thing that I just kind of had pop of my head was like, what if someone proposed the hypothetical of like, okay, they've fixed all of that part of it, you know? And it's just that, like, I guess it falls back to it's unnatural, and I guess it would be disordered because, a child deserves to be born of, the marital act between his father and mother. So I guess that's probably if they propose the hypothetical where all of that other stuff was not on the table, it would still be wrong because of that piece, right?
Yeah, a child deserves to be the product of a loving union between a father and a mother. Now, we know that's not always how it happens in real life. We don't purposely create those situations where it's not going to happen that way. And so, I know couples struggling with infertility, that is a heavy cross to bear, and I don't want to trivialize that at all. There are also children desperately seeking parents. And it seems to me that there is a happy way of resolving that in which everyone benefits. And it's not by going out and creating some new kid in a lab somewhere. And that's just not the way. Now, and to those who are listening who may be the product of IVF, whatever the means of your conception, God loves you and I love you. That's not the question here at all. I had a classmate who was conceived in rape. That didn't make the rape okay, the fact that she was a wonderful young woman. That it's not an either or. We can both say, you deserve to come into the world in a better way, and I'm also still glad you're here. And I think some people need to hear that, because if we only say, here's why IVF is wrong, and don't mention that other part, I do think we run the risk of sending a message we're not trying to say to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes total sense.
All right. Thanks, Josh. Thank you so much for your question. Really good question. That was it got a lot deeper than I thought it was going to. That's great. So all right, Josh, thank you so much once again. All right, we're going to go over to Portland, Oregon, where Katie is listening on Modern Day Radio. Katie, welcome to the show. You're on Live with Joe. Oh, wait, that's my fault. I just hit the wrong button. I just pulled a sigh. There it is. All right, sorry about that, Katie. Now you're on live.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah. My question today, I have some in-laws who are LDS, and I'm a Protestant. And so recently we were talking, and it came to the conversation that they believe that Eve had to eat the fruit in order to fulfill the command to be fruitful and multiply, because they were innocent like children, and then their eyes had to be open to their nakedness in order to procreate and be fruitful and multiply, which obviously we would disagree with and say Eve was never supposed to eat the fruit. But this actually plays really well into the last question, because then their follow-up is, well, then why didn't they have children in the garden if they were able to? And I don't really have a good answer for that, other than maybe they just weren't there very long. And so I'm curious for your perspective.
Yeah, I think actually you've touched on one. There have been disputes even going way back about how long they were in the garden. There was one theory in the early church that they grew up in the garden. Irenaeus leans towards that theory. I don't think it says that. I mean, it clearly does not say that in the text. And so it doesn't say, Adam was like a young boy and then grew up. That's possible with Genesis, but it's certainly not required of the text. One thing you should know with the LDS is that they don't treat these passages as divinely inspired or completely true, because they would say the Book of Mormon is, more inerrant than the Bible is. And so you can't just point to the fact that it clearly says in Genesis 2:16 and 17, and then in Genesis 3:1 that they're not supposed to do this, because they'll say, oh yeah, I mean, sure it says that, but they really were supposed to do it. So that is kind of a confusing thing in, I would say, Christian LDS kind of conversations, that we don't read Genesis the same way because we don't treat Genesis the same way. I would suggest one reading, and now this is somewhat speculative, because I would say one answer is just the Bible doesn't tell us why they didn't have children yet, but we do get these details that I think are significant. Number one, in Genesis 3:15, you have the first prophecy of the virgin birth. God says to the serpent, I'll put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. And so the seed is normally measured through the man. The word zera is the Hebrew word for seed or semen. And so it's measured through the man, but in this case, it's not measured through the man, it's measured through the woman. So who is the seed or the offspring of the woman? Why doesn't it not say the seed of Adam like it would in all the other instances? Well, because the one being prophesied, who will crush the head of Satan, doesn't have a human biological father. And so this is also, depending on what kind of LDS you're talking to, there are many LDS who believe that Mary was physically impregnated by God the Father, which is totally contrary to the biblical text. It's also totally contrary to Genesis 3:15, which is speaking of a virgin birth. That's not official LDS doctrine, but especially around like Utah is a pretty widespread Mormon belief. So in Genesis 3:15, you have the first prophecy of the virgin birth. And then in the middle of them being punished, Adam turns to his wife, who, remember, prior to this had been named woman, and renames her Eve, which means mother of all the living. That's Genesis 3:20. That's in the midst of the fall, because then the next verse, then they're made the skins of garments, and then they're kicked out of the garden. So I mention that to say there's a very curious detail. Why does we have this woman to mother transition going on right here, and what can that tell us about the passage? I would suggest that we get the answer to that by looking at the Gospel of John. In Hebrew, the name of this book is Bereshit, in the beginning. And John's gospel begins the same way, in the beginning. And then, if you look very closely, John's gospel in John 1 and John 2 then has a series of 6 days, like the original Genesis has the 6 days of creation, getting to a man and woman. And so you have the testimony of John the Baptist beginning in verse 19, and then it says the next day in verse 29, so we're up to day 2. Then in verse 35, it says the next day, day 3. Verse 43, it says the next day. Jump over to John 2. Remember, the page breaks aren't originally there. And it says on the third day. Now, Hebrew and Greek, well, Hebrew at least, numbers days differently. So on the third day means 2 days later. Like when we say Jesus rose again on the third day, we mean 2 days later. So on the third day, you were at day 4. On the third day puts us 2 days later to day 6. Day 6 of the original Genesis, you've got the creation of man and woman. Day 6 of the new Genesis, you have what? You have the wedding feast of Cana. And you see 2 people there. And it's strangely not the bride and groom. It's Jesus and Mary. And what does Jesus call Mary? He calls her woman, which is what Adam calls Eve in Genesis 2. So then you say, okay, well, that's a strange kind of thing. He's calling her woman at the same point, day 6 of the new creation, that the original Eve had been called woman. But does he go from calling her woman to mother? And the answer is yes, he does. And it's at the very moment that he's curing the curse. So he's on the cross, undoing the curse of Adam, and he looks down from the cross. This is in John 19, and he says, woman, behold your son. And then he says to John, behold your mother. That same woman to mother transition that we saw in Genesis 3:20, we now see here. Now notice, if that's intentional, and it certainly looks intentional, that tells us a lot. Because Eve was a virgin and is being called mother. Mary, we believe, is a virgin and is being called mother. One of the reasons Jesus right here is entrusting the Apostle John to Mary and Mary to John is that Mary doesn't have any other biological children. And yet here, even though she has no kids, besides the one who's dying, she's being named mother, just as the first Eve was named mother of all the living, even though in Genesis 3 she had no children yet. And so what kind of mother is Mary? Revelation 12 tells us she's the mother of all those who hold to the testimony of Jesus Christ. Revelation 12:17 says that. And so we would see in this, like, the reason Eve is a virgin in the garden is because she's a prefigurement of Mary, and that her virginal status is relevant for the fact that Genesis 3:15 is a prophecy of the virgin birth. That Genesis is, as the early Christians call it, the proto-evangelium, the first gospel. Like, the reason certain things happen in Genesis is as foreshadowing of things that are going to happen in the life of Christ. I know I just unloaded the fire hose a little bit, but did that make sense at all?
How's that for some exegesis, right?
No, I really appreciated it. My husband's in the room with me, and he's just nodding vigorously. So I think we definitely are very pleased with your answer, and thank you so much for the detailed explanation.
And by the way, this is all going to be on YouTube. So if you say, I wish I had a few more of those Bible verses, I'd love to see that again. You can just play it again to your heart's content. And I also give a talk about this. So if you want to get a local Catholic church to bring me to Portland and go listen to it for free, I'd be happy to go.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Right.
you bet.
Thanks, Katie. I think you just won a free trip to Portland. That's basically it. But
that was pretty shameless title. I just mean
Yeah.
I want to talk about this for an hour, but I know that won't make for good radio.
Fair enough.
So if there's ways of arranging.
So
that.
whenever you hear things like this, I always think of the people walking at Emmaus when they're listening to Jesus breaking open the scriptures and saying, "Were our hearts not on fire?" That's so cool. Well,
I don't think I quite deserve that comparison, but I appreciate it.
We'll be right back after this break.
Many people have forgotten just how revolutionary the Bible creation stories are. But the first 3 chapters of Genesis are a powerful challenge to anyone in any generation who would undervalue human lives. In the Beginning, the new book by Monica Migliorino Miller, will take you on a fantastic journey through the first chapters of Genesis, unfolding the richness of life as God sees it. Get In the Beginning today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
When it comes to Catholic teachings about Mary, there's one question we hear more than any other. Where is that in the Bible? The answer? Everywhere. In Bible Mary, the Mother of Jesus and the Word of God, Father John Weiss opens Scripture to reveal a Mary who has been hiding in plain sight. Order your copy of Bible Mary today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
What was the church like in its infancy? In a word, Catholic. And Joe Heschmeyer has the receipts. In his best-selling book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, he gives you the details from the historical records of the first 2 centuries of Christianity. Right now, get a copy for just $10, plus free shipping if you live in the continental United States. Get more information and order The Early Church Was the Catholic Church at theearlychurchwascatholic.com.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Catholic Answers Live. Ask Me Anything with Joe Heschmeyer. But before we get back to the calls, you have to check out shop.catholic.com today and check out our store-wide sale. Everything in our online shop is reduced 10 to 25% and more. Books, online courses, rosaries, scapulars, puzzles, clothing, hundreds of great items all on sale. Want to know a great gift for any Catholic on your list? Check out the Big Book of Catholic Answers. Use the promo code BIGBOOK and save 25% at checkout. Get on over to shop.catholic.com today and get yours today. This is a really cool reference book. I mean, hefty, it's big, it's got Catholic answers. So, I don't know. What do you think, Joe? And
I'm intrigued. I don't actually know a whole lot about the book, but I love the bigness of it and the branding of it.
Fair enough.
I'm looking forward to kind of seeing the format.
Yeah, I was talking to Todd here, the director of publishing. He's saying it's going to be a series of 3 books, and it's going to be just a nice collection for people who get into apologetics. So go ahead and check that out. I mean, 25% off. You can't beat that right now. So there you have it.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's jump back into the calls, Joe.
Yeah, please.
All right. We go over to, let's see, Hunter in North Carolina. He's watching on YouTube. Hunter, welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was calling in because my mother-in-law is a non-practicing Catholic, and she is planning on getting married this December to a man who's divorced, and my wife and I were wondering whether or not we should attend, because from what we can tell, it doesn't seem like it would be a valid marriage, and we were just trying to figure out what would be the best practice on whether or not to go, or possibly going to a reception afterwards, but it's going to be a small court ceremony, not a bigger event.
Yeah, so it used to be, under the older Code of Canon Law, that Catholics were strictly prohibited from going to events like that. And that made it really easy to just be like, well, church says I can't. And now there's more latitude given. You can't endorse something you don't regard as an authentic union. There, it gets tricky because there's a few things that make it tricky. Number one is there can sometimes be the question of, will this be a valid marriage in the future? That makes it unlike cases, like so-called same-sex marriage, where it'll never be an actual marriage. It'll never be a sacrament. It won't be a sacrament. It won't even be a natural marriage. But in the case where it's the kind of thing that could be a natural marriage, but there's, something like an annulment to work out or any of those kind of things, there you will find people who take different views on whether they should or shouldn't go. The short answer is this: you can't endorse them doing something that is objectively not right with God. You want to preserve the relationship as much as you can, but also make clear that you don't go along with this. In the same way, if someone, well, not in the same way, any analogy is going to obviously be different. But if someone said, hey, I want to go on a double date with you and I'm going to bring my mistress, and you knew they were married, you'd say, no, I can't. Because even to do that, I would seem to be celebrating and endorsing this relationship I think shouldn't happen. You might find the mistress to be a lovely woman. You might find, they're both incredibly nice people, but the relationship itself is sinful. The relationship itself is not of God because of the way they've proceeded with it. So in those cases, it's often the right thing to do, to make the hard decision to say, I can't in good conscience attend that, but I want you to know that it's not for any lack of love for you or for him. It's precisely out of the fact that I love you, that I don't want to see you hurt yourself by not going in a way God has in store for you. Those are hard conversations. I mentioned in the last hour that one of the things Jesus talks about is coming to bring division, that there are times where faithfully following Jesus might cause tension in the family. And he tells us that up front. And for many people, this is precisely where they experience that teaching in a really visceral kind of way. Does that make sense, Hunter?
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, you bet.
Great. Thanks, Hunter. Thank you so much for your call. We go over to Chris in Spokane, Washington, watching us on YouTube. Chris, welcome to the show. You're on Live with Joe.
Hi there. So let's continue in the same vein, I guess. My wife and I'm confirmed Catholic. My wife and I have been married for 10 years, but it would be considered an invalid or non-canonical marriage. And we're currently seeking convalidation, but was just curious if I should also be not partaking in the Eucharist until our marriage is fully convalidated.
You have to choose. So the standard answer people give here is you have to not receive the Eucharist. And I would actually say, no, I think God is calling you to something more radical than that, which is not to live as a married couple until you are, in fact, a married couple in the eyes of God. But what that looks like can be a little complicated on the ground. St. John Paul II talks about this in a document called Familiaris Consortio. In paragraph 84, he says, and I'm just going to quote him here, the Church reaffirms her practice, which is based upon sacred scripture, of not admitting to Eucharistic communion divorced persons who have remarried. They are unable to be admitted thereto from the fact that their state and condition of life objectively contradict that union of love between Christ and the Church, which is signified and effected by the Eucharist. Besides this, there is another special pastoral reason. If these people were admitted to the Eucharist, the faithful would be led into error and confusion regarding the Church's teaching about the indissolubility of marriage. So that's the teaching in a nutshell. But then in the next paragraph, I should say, he goes on to say that reconciliation in the sacrament of penance, which would open the way to the Eucharist, can only be granted to those who, having repented of broken the sign of the covenant and fidelity to Christ, are sincerely ready to undertake a way of life that is no longer in contradiction to the indissolubility of marriage. But then he says, this means in practice that when, for serious reasons, such as, for example, the children's upbringing, a man and woman cannot satisfy the obligation to separate, they take on themselves the duty to live in complete continence, that is, by abstinence from the acts proper to married couples. In plain language, if you can't live apart, for instance, you're raising a family together, then you're called upon to not sleep together, to live as brother and sister, and to not do anything that would constitute uniquely something only a husband and wife could do with one another until you are fully a husband and wife in the eyes of God. This is, I think, again, as with the last call, this is one of those areas where I think there is a radical nature of the decision to follow Christ. So, yeah, does that make sense? Do you have questions about that?
No, that does make sense. Yeah, neither of us have been married before. It was just,
okay.
I
Great.
guess, me not being well catechized and kind of an oversight, and now realizing after 10 years, whoops. So,
yeah. Well, let me suggest something for you, too. You can also ask for the church to give what's called a radical sanation, which is a healing of the roots. And it's a recognition that you were not, intentionally rebelling from God, even the way you're describing it. This is the kind of thing that can be a marriage. And it's the recognition that basically that that from the beginning, this was something that is blessed by God, even if you didn't do it in the way that he asked you to do originally. That's not a willful rebellion. So you can seek that from the church as kind of a recognition of the relationship you've had so far, that you don't have to just pretend you had nothing, even if you didn't have what you were meant to have and what God has in store for you. So that's very good news. I think good things are coming your way in plenty of senses, including sacramental graces.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
All right.
Yeah, wonderful. God bless you, Chris.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Thank you for your call. Give us a call back if you ever need anything else. We're here for you. So with that, we're going to go to our final break for the show today. So if you actually, I'm not going to give the phone number out today for this hour. We got plenty of calls on the line. So we'll be right back right after this break.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Hi, this is Father Mike Schmitz. Please join me for Ascension's Bible in a Year and Catechism in a Year here on EWTN Radio. We're going through the entire Bible and the Catechism in 365 days. If you've ever wanted to understand what it means to be Catholic and allow those truths to shape your life, this is for you.
Bible in a Year and Catechism in a Year with Father Mike Schmitz, tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific on EWTN Radio.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. We're going to go back to the phones because we have quite a few lines filled up. So we go over to Rhonda in South Carolina watching on YouTube. Rhonda, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
Go right ahead.
So me and my husband and all of our kids just converted to Catholicism back in Easter.
Welcome home.
This year. Yeah. And before that, we were Baptist. And before that, we were actually King James only Baptist.
Okay.
So
yeah.
So we have a kind of a big interest in Bible translations and such. But so the Protestant argument is that in the 1500s, there's Tyndale, or yeah, right, Tyndale.
Yeah, William Tindale. Yep.
Yeah. He's he was persecuted by the Catholic Church because he's translating the Bible into English, and the Catholic Church didn't want common people to be able to read the Bible. The whole argument. And so I've heard that Catholic side say that there were translations in English before his time. So I'm having a hard time finding what the names of the translations were.
Yeah.
I just was kind of looking into more information on that.
Yeah, what makes
I have to
this
deal with
tricky?
my old friends and family.
Yeah, right. What makes this tricky is that English went through massive shifts from what's called Middle English to early modern English around this same time period. So in the 1400s, basically anything written before the 1400s, even if you read it in English, is going to be basically inscrutable because the language itself shifted so much. So it's much easier to give, for instance, all of the German Bibles before Luther because German was more stable. But English, which has always been this kind of hodgepodge language, underwent some really incredibly large shifts. So a lot of what we think of as like Old English, like Shakespeare, is technically speaking modern English. It's just early modern English. And so the reason you can read, a 1611 King James Version of the Bible is because it's still written in the same language we speak today. Whereas if you go back even to one of the earlier English Bibles, it will be impossible for you to read. So when we talk about earlier English Bibles, one thing you should know is those weren't very legible to the ordinary person, not because of any Catholic conspiracy, but because English underwent this really shockingly large transformation in a very short period of time for reasons that in some cases we don't understand very well. This is connected to something called the Great Vowel Shift. I'm going to leave all of the nerdy stuff aside and say the most famous pre-Reformation English Bible is what's called Wycliffe's Bible, or more accurately, the Middle English Bible. And it's from the 1380s to 1390s. For a long time, they thought that John Wycliffe had been the chief author behind it. But more recent scholarship has actually suggested, despite its name, that he wasn't the principal guy behind it, whether he had a role in it or not. And so so the Middle English Bible. But it's true that there were fewer English translations of the Bible. You had plenty of shorter passages of the Bible where particular books would be translated. And you've got hundreds of years of examples of that. The Venerable Bede, who we call Saint Bede, he translated some version or some portion of the Bible. I don't think those manuscripts are around anymore. So there had been centuries of people hand translating or interpreting books of the Bible. Some of the translations are more summaries of books, but they're attempting to do this very difficult thing of taking from Latin and Greek and Hebrew, usually just Latin, into Old or Middle English. So those translations exist, but wouldn't have been readable to a person living in the 1600s any more than they would be readable to you or me today.
Okay, so and you said that it was kind of unknown. Was it not written? Is there any theories about why?
Sorry, what was unknown?
You said it was kind of unknown as to why there was such a huge shift in English.
Oh, yeah. So in the period of a short span of time, English starts to look very different in written form. And based on things like poetry, we can also see that it starts to be pronounced differently because rhyme schemes don't make sense. If you go back further and you realize, they must have pronounced that word very differently before. So something happens in the language that in this transition from Middle English to early modern English, where there's major changes. There's also changes even in things like the letters. So you'll find letters in Middle English that we don't have today.
Okay. It was the Wycliffe Bible. I know, they say he was persecuted for that also. Was that available
the
during,
thing that makes that confusing is Wycliffe probably didn't write the Wycliffe Bible. Wycliffe was persecuted for being a heretic, not because of the Bible. Nevertheless, the fact that a lot of the people who promoted English language Bibles were also heretics for other reasons does hurt the push for a lot of English language Bibles. So at one point, the English king had cracked down on English versions of the Bible because he didn't want to deal with a bunch of heretical movements kind of rising up and causing turmoil. So the English situation in particular is pretty unique. But blaming the situation of English on the Catholic Church, I think misses a lot of what's going on, both in terms of English politics and in just the evolution of the English language as a language. Because you can see other countries that don't have that same history, like Italy, like Germany, like any of the Romance kind of languages. It doesn't happen the same way.
All right, Rhonda, we're going to go ahead and leave that right there because I want to get to more callers before the end of the show. So thank you for that. We go over to here in California. We go to Peter, listening on Sirius XM satellite radio. Peter, go right ahead with your question.
Hey, how's it going?
Doing
good.
Great.
How are you?
Very good, very good. My question is pertaining to children receiving the sacraments of confirmation and Holy Communion. During COVID, my wife and I, we went to a Melkite rite, and we had the situation of them trying to give communion to our children, which is interesting. But my question is, why is the Roman rite not do that?
Yeah, so
And
neither
is it
form
objectively
is
better than
instructed by God. So Eastern Catholics and Western Catholics approach the sacramental disciplines differently. And I think if I can give a short version of the case for each side. On confirmation, in the early days, confirmation is clearly done by the apostles and then by their successors, the bishops. With dispensation, the bishop can authorize a priest, but nobody else, to do it. Like a deacon can't perform confirmation. So in the early days, and you can see this in Acts chapter 8, when the Samaritans convert, they're converted by a deacon. He can't give them the laying on of hands that we call confirmation, what the East calls chrismation. And so 2 of the apostles come down from Jerusalem to do it. So that becomes a problem once the church gets really big. Anybody can baptize, but then when are they going to receive confirmation? So your choices are authorize priests to give confirmation at the moment they're baptizing, or wait until the child is older and the bishop will do it. And so the East chose the first of those choices. The West chose the second one. The beauty of the East choice is that it preserves the fact that there's no reason a child can't be confirmed at even a very young age. Confirmation is not you confirming God's choice. It's God confirming what he's begun in baptism. That's what's being confirmed in confirmation. And what the appeal of the Western side is it preserves this connection to the bishop, who is the local head. And so you want this connection in a sort of visible way. So I see why both sides kind of do what they do on confirmation. On communion, the case for the Eastern Catholic practice of giving Holy Communion to baptized infants is twofold. One, Jesus says, "Let the children come unto me," and this is the full induction into the church. This is, the culmination of initiation. But 2, the manner in which they give Holy Communion, where it's a small piece of the host on, in some cases, a spoon, and it's something that a little child could receive more easily. Whereas the West has preserved giving the 2 species of bread and wine separately, and the host as a full host, that just for logistical reasons, it'd be difficult to commune an infant in the Western rite. Not impossible, it can be done, but it does create more of a pragmatic challenge. The case for the Western side is that we want to encourage the recognition that the bread and wine are no longer bread and wine, but are the body and blood of Christ. And so a child who can recognize that is ready to receive Jesus in Holy Communion. St. Paul warns against receiving communion unworthily in 1 Corinthians 11. So we want to balance somehow letting the children come to Christ and also making sure that communion is received with a proper spiritual disposition, which is why we wait to commune people, to make sure they have that proper spiritual disposition. So those would be the kind of argument in favor of both praxes. And this is not a case where one side is right and the other side is wrong. We're both following Christ, but doing it in somewhat different ways here.
Peter, thank you so much for your call. We're going to go ahead and leave it right there. We go over to Paducah, Kentucky, where Amy is listening on YouTube. Amy, go right ahead with your question, please.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I just got a question about, I'll be dead honest, Protestant end times theology makes me very nervous. It kind of weirds me out. I don't really know what to think. Someone told me recently that somebody reminds them of Nikolai Carpathia. And so I wondered kind of basically what the key differences between Catholic end times theology, Protestant end times theology, kind of how that shakes out. And I do want to send a shout out. I don't know that he's listening. Jimmy Aiken, he did the thing on COVID vaccine, whether or not it was the mark of the beast, because somebody asked, and I loved his answer. That made me feel better. And then John Martinoni said that the rapture, we could believe in a rapture. I listened to a talk that he did, but it's going to be like Jesus said, like in the days of Noah, the good guys were left behind. So in light of both those things, do you have any audio resources? I'm totally blind, so a book won't work. Could you maybe point me in the direction of some audio resources that would kind of do a comparison, of Protestant and Catholic end time theologies, and especially in light of the Left Behind series, since people are so fond of that.
So we have an ebook in a Catholic Answers booklet called End Times, 20 Answers End Times. I don't know if it's in audiobook format, and I don't know if you have like an e-reader that can do text to speech. But if you stick around, we can get you a copy of that, because I think this is a question people often have. I mean, there's a lot of different Protestant views on the end times, but it seems from your question that you're talking about like Left Behind and kind of the rapture theology from more of a dispensational Protestantism. Is that right?
Yeah, see, because like I said, I know very little about it. I became Catholic 31 years ago, and I was never an active part of any of the discussions about the rapture, but I'm kind of weirded out by stickers that say, "In case of rapture, this car will be unmanned," stuff like that.
So one thing to say, just very briefly, is this is a very young theology. The first person to really push it would be like in the 1830s. So if you've got 1,800 years of Christians, Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, who'd never heard of this event called the rapture in this way, that is a big red flag that somebody is reading the Bible wrong, and it's probably not all of the people who are reading it the same way. It's probably John Nelson Darby and the people who start believing in. So this is, he was, I think, an Anglican who then kind of went in an even more Protestant direction. And so he changes religious affiliation over time. He's just personally reading the Bible. He doesn't understand kind of the Greek context of certain expressions. So, like, for instance, when a triumphant king would come into towards a city, people would rush out to meet him. And so, as N.T. Wright points out, who's himself a Protestant, the biblical imagery of going up to meet God, it's this. It's like we're meeting the triumphant king as he comes into the city. But then what happens isn't you leave the city behind. You then escort the king into the city. That's the kind of biblical imagery being used. But if you're reading it without any sense of the first century or Greek civilization or Greco-Roman civilization, I should say, then you're just missing kind of these expressions and what they actually mean. So that's the answer in kind of the short version. But if you stick around, we'll give you kind of a longer version explaining we're not meant to just abandon Earth. We're meant to invite Christ into its transformation into the new heavens and the new earth.
Amy, hang on the line. We can definitely send you that book through email if you'd like. If you do have a text to voice reader for you, but that's going to do it for us. Joe, that was the quick 2 hours.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure. I'm glad to have gotten to spend the time with you, Edgar.
Yeah, likewise, Joe. Likewise. So
my favorite Catholic Answers host. Tell Cy that.
We will. You know what? I'm going to print that out and post it somewhere here in the studio, just so he sees it every day. Thanks again, Joe. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, with that, that's going to do it for us today. Tomorrow, join us for another Ask Me Anything, and I'll be hosting. So I'll see you back here tomorrow.